Greetings, everyone. My name is Sarah Barnes, and on behalf of Campbell & Company, I'd like to welcome you to Campaign Prep 2, Building the Plane While Flying It. Before we begin today's presentation, I'd like to quickly review some logistics for those of you who may be new to Campbell & Company webinars. First, programs are going to go to webinar, of course, that are running on your computer. Call in using a telephone instead of using your computer speakers. Move away your cell phone away from your computer, and if you experience any visual issues, send a chat to Campbell & Company, and you can also contact the webinar at 1-800-263-6317. Today's webinar will last 60 minutes, and you'll earn 1 continuing education credit, and that is good for certification with CFRE International. About an hour after the webinar, you will receive an email from GoToWebinar that includes the web address to download your certificate and the PDF of the presentation. And now I'd like to give a few words about Craig Hightower. Craig is a Vice President and Director of our Western region at Campbell & Company. He has partnered with many organizations on the West and Northwest coast to help them increase their philanthropic potential. Now I'm going to turn it over to Craig. Craig?
Thanks, Sarah. I appreciate it. Today, actually, as Sarah mentioned, is the second part of a 2-part series on campaign planning and preparation. For those of you who joined us last time, we heard from Jake DeMoe from the Nature Conservancy in California about what they did to plan up for their campaign. Basically, it was a Cadillac planning and just did everything right. Today, we're going to hear something that's actually quite the opposite. So Jane Hargraft, Vice President of Development for the Seattle Symphony, is joining us. Prior to being part of the Symphony, Jane was General Manager of Opera Atelier in Canada, as well as the Director of Development for the Canadian Opera Company. Basically, what you're going to hear from Jane is a very unconventional approach to campaign planning, and that's why we're calling it Building the Plane While Flying It.
And so possibly crashing it a few times as well.
Crashing it as well. If you go to the next slide, Rebecca. Just to give you a little what we're going to cover, we're going to get a little background on Seattle Symphony. We're going to tell you about what they did to prepare for the current campaign that they're in, talk about where they are now and what some of the challenges they see that are ahead. And if we have time, we're going to take questions from the audience. If not, please send your questions along and we'll get back to you after the webinar is complete. But before we start, I want to take a really quick poll. And in front of you, you'll see on your screen coming in just about 2 seconds, how many of you are either currently in a campaign or getting ready to launch a campaign. We'll just take 2 seconds for everybody to click in, just get a sense of who's out there. And I think we're almost ready. Interesting. And I just lost it on the screen. Here we go. Okay, well, then let me give you some background. I do kind of chronology about what has happened so far with the Symphony. We've had the privilege of working with them for about a little over 2 decades now, on and off. We first started working with the Symphony back in early 1994. The Symphony was looking at building a new symphony hall in downtown Seattle as part of the revitalization project of an area that was really had really been run down in years. And what really became of this was it was the most significant campaign that the city had seen. And it really changed the trajectory, I think, forever in Seattle. And it really set the bar for new philanthropy. Philanthropy at the time was still very young in the city, and this really changed that. But the one thing that they didn't do, and there were discussions, and it was, I think looking back on it, was probably not a good decision, but at the time they were looking at getting the building built. They felt it was too much of a stretch to begin to build their endowment fund, so they chose not to do that. So when the hall opened in 1998, it was about a $120 million public-private venture, and again, without endowment. But then, so about 2 years later, after the hall had opened, they launched a fund they called the 21st Century Fund to address what that endowment need was. They were looking for about $50 million. They did not do a study, and they just could never get the thing off the ground. So then moving forward a little to 2007, they were in a period of time where they had a structural deficit of about $2.5 million. They launched this thing they called the Extraordinary Funding Campaign. And basically, it was very poor messaging, but what they did is they went out to the community, basically said, the sky is falling, the sky is falling, and if you give this one gift to us right now, we won't come back and ask you again, and this will help write the orchestra. But unfortunately, it did not fix the situation. And at the same time, they continued to get bad press about the orchestra that was struggling financially. And as well, around the same time, the orchestra members were disgruntled and wanting a new artistic director. And they actually got a lot of national press around what was going on with the orchestra. So moving forward into 2008, they came to us and asked us to do a feasibility study for a potential $100 million endowment campaign. The problem was that the Extraordinary Funding Campaign had really left a bad taste in many of the donors' mouths. There was a lot of infighting among the board members about the artistic director's situation. We knew at the time that there was going to be a change of artistic leadership, but we weren't able to talk about it into the community. And much of what we heard from many of the donors was, until that situation is resolved, we couldn't possibly think about a gift for the orchestra. Again, the orchestra members were still very disgruntled. And as you have a symphony, a large symphony that all has children that are in the community going to school with the other children of your donors, it was very known out in the community about how disgruntled the orchestra members were. And they still were seeing a budget shortfall of about $2.5 million. They also had McKinsey's study that had done a couple of years earlier and basically was talking about how significantly undercapitalized the orchestra was. So basically, when we came back to deliver our report, we said, you're still not ready to go out there and do a campaign. You really need to wait until the new artistic leadership is in place. You need a visible executive director. Most people didn't even know who he was, and he wasn't out there with donors. They had so drastically cut back staffing because of the deficit that they really cut back the development staff, and the development staff was just back to bare bones, and unfortunately couldn't really keep up with what the need was. And they really needed to talk about a strong case about the future. So they kept talking about the deficit where they were, and campaigns are really about the future, where the orchestra is going to be 10 years from now, and how we as a donor can help that orchestra get there in the future. And it needs to be that and not about the deficit. They also really needed to revamp the board and get the right leadership in place. And then also their constituency was aging. So they really needed to start looking at planned giving as a possibility and not just cash. So after we delivered the report, which they didn't like because it didn't tell them they could raise $100 million, their board chair left, their artistic director left, their executive director left, their development director left, and the deficits continued. Then comes along a wonderful board member who's now their board chair, Leslie Chihuly, who really started building the board and really personally recruited so many of the board members. They brought in a new conductor, they brought in a new general manager, and they brought in a new vice president of development. And for the first time, there was just such a new attitude around the orchestra. And so when they approached us again, the new management team, to look at providing counsel for a $100 million campaign, I'm going to toss it to Jane, but there was a decision not to do a feasibility study, and Jane will talk to you about what the decisions were that went into that.
Thanks, Craig. So, you know, with all those conditions, you know, having all these challenges, it really, boy, what a great job to have. And it really said to me, I really want to move to Seattle. So you know, I got here in October 2011, and when I arrived, the fundraising consulting firm that we were working with before I arrived recommended that we jump immediately into a $50 million bridge campaign. And I was hesitant to do that because the previous two jobs that I had were sort of I wouldn't say exactly turnarounds, but we had similar situations where, you know, donors were not feeling well taken care of. We were having challenges with some of our constituencies, musicians, venues, that sort of thing. And so, from my experience, I knew that we really had a couple of years of apologizing ahead of us, talking to donors and treating them with respect and being much more transparent about what's going on before we could launch really into anything major. And so in the fall of 2012, we started to discuss internally the fact that we actually really did need to do the campaign, and we decided to proceed without a feasibility study. So typically, you know, obviously you do a feasibility study to see whether the community and particularly your donors will support what you're doing, and we decided not to do one for a whole bunch of reasons. So this is sort of our first standard deviation, or sort of building the plane while flying it. First of all, the 2008 data was still available to us, so you know, we didn't think in 3 years that things had changed that much, except that the financial situation, people's financial situation had. We'd solved the problems, or largely solved the problems that had been identified. There was low community trust in the leadership. We had an inward-facing reputation. It was all about, you know, us and how fabulous we are, as opposed to what can we do for the community. We really did an RFP, and we talked to a bunch of national level companies. Campbell was one of them, who also, you know, came to the table, and we decided to go with Campbell in our RFP, and apart from the fact that it was also a good fit, they had also worked on the BH campaign and had done the feasibility study, so we decided not to do it again. And frankly, we had no choice. We had done, you know, after being here for a year, we'd done some financial modeling. We had to do this campaign, and we really had the attitude, you know, pilgrim, there is no way, but we must go. And so we made the decision to craft the campaign and launch it quietly in 2013. Craig? So Craig, can you just talk about the strategy and the 4 areas that we concentrated on?
Sorry, I forgot. I didn't realize I was muted. The
occupational hazard.
Their question came through about the $2.5 million deficit. That was a structural deficit on the annual basis, so that they had been carrying for several years. So our strategy basically took 4-prong approach, and we're going to go through in depth of each of these 4 areas. But just in a nutshell, the case for support, we really needed to change the narrative, because the orchestra was in the red. There was a structural deficit, but things had changed. Bad debt wasn't necessarily a bad word anymore, especially now that debt was so cheap. And in fact, in some of the early gifts that the orchestra received, it didn't make sense for the orchestra to actually pay down the debt because it was so cheap. So in today's economy, things looked a little bit different. And there was more of a focus. We put the focus on capitalization. There was a lot of stuff being written in arts organizations about what does appropriate capitalization look like. It's not necessarily just having it in endowment. It could be in reserves and cash flow issues. And what does that really look like? And it really has to do with current use dollars, having dollars available for temporarily restricted dollars that you may spend down in the next 3 to 6 years. There's endowment, and then there's also cash reserves. And we're going to talk about how they structured that in the symphony's case as well. So the big question is, what does that capitalization look like for today's major orchestra in today's economy? And then we also needed to get at the question of what does the community really value about the symphony and what ultimately would encourage their support. So we did work on that end. On the internal preparedness side, there was such a growing pressure on the annual fund, and not only did they need those annual dollars, they needed that annual fund to grow during the campaign. So there was a concern, if the campaign goes on, will it take away from the annual fund? So we'll tell you what we did to address that as well. And then we looked at what kind of staffing they might need, and they just, what kind of bandwidth they needed to take on this campaign and grow the annual fund at the same time. We looked at what their relationship management practices were in place, and at the time, the program that they were using, it's now much more robust, didn't really have the capability to put strong relationship management practices in place. So they really needed a database that could support that. Under the donor engagement piece, we really looked at who we could immediately solicit while we were preparing to launch this campaign, who were those big hits that we could get, and ultimately, how do we begin to segment this donor base and begin to build the pipeline while we're trying to get some of those big gifts. And then finally, around the leadership, for the first time in a decade, they had really strong artistic leadership in place, the much improved orchestra relations. They had a really well-respected executive director who is literally a fearless fundraiser. He wants to be out there calling on donors every day of the week and every lunch and dinner out there. And they had an excellent development staff in place for the first time in a very, very long time. And then finally, the board was not only strong, it was all finally pulling in the same direction. So in addition to those 4 areas, there was some other factors. Certainly the 20-year anniversary of Benaroya Hall was approaching. There was an opportunity to do some celebrations around that, and that'll be in 2018. They really had a strong artistic vision in place that was really well articulated, and being able to articulate how it would be to fully capitalize the symphony. And their philanthropic giving had really been increasing over the past 3 years, going straight into that. And so we also thought around this capitalization, since it was such a hot topic, that if the symphony could actually figure this out, they might be a leader in defining exactly how you appropriately capitalize an arts organization, much like they defined philanthropy in so many ways for the city of Seattle when the Benaroya Hall presentation came along. So as we go through this presentation, we're going to take you through each of these 4 areas, and we're going to discuss what we did, but we'll also discuss what didn't work. So starting on the next slide, the case for support, we're going to first focus on how they built the case, and Jane's going to discuss the comprehensive needs assessment the orchestra went through on the next slide.
Okay, so thanks, Craig. So what essentially happened in 2012 was my boss, the president and CEO, and I, with assistance from the director of finance, we did a projection out 10 years, and we took a look at our expenses, our revenue, and we found that, we, like many organizations of our size, we have a structural deficit or structural funding gap of between $1 to $2.5 million each year. And this was being masked in some years in the symphony through the solicitation and acquiring of very large, high 6- and 7-figure gifts. So in a lot of years where we balanced our budget, we were actually getting very large gifts that were, sort of savior gifts that were masking this problem, and they were not renewable, a good portion of them. So we really identified that. And the challenges that we have in, and I don't know what it's like in say the education sector or the healthcare sector, but in performing arts sector, sort of symphonies and opera and ballet, we have a business model that has high fixed costs, particularly it's all personnel, all people, and really no efficiencies, right? So you can't perform a quartet with 3 people, right? So that's your business model in the symphony business. Also, across the arts, and particularly across symphonies, we have declining subscription sales. So we're increasing in our flexi packs and our single tickets, but there is no step change financially available to the symphony through ticket sales. And we also have costs which we have, really little control over: personnel costs, medical, and retirement costs that are raising faster than we can raise the earned income. So the one lever that we do have, we look at our revenue levers, is subscription sales, and you take a look at the other lever we have expenses. There's just no change there. So fundraising is where we need to do it, and we also needed increased liquidity or capitalization through the campaign to make strategic investments to close the operational gap, and then also to build up the endowment's reserves. We have one of the smallest endowments of any of the orchestras of our size in the country, and it really hamstrings our ability to be flexible. Craig, so next slide, please.
Yeah. So on the next slide, we went through this. We're calling it a bucketing exercise. This doesn't really depict exact distribution of dollars, but it's just graphic to make a point. So in each of these areas, our music, our community, our youth, what they did is they had this massive spreadsheet, and we tried to put it together in some similar categories. And some things were cross-cutting ideas, didn't quite fit into one bucket, but we knew we had to have a message that was very simple for donors to understand. But also in each of these bucketed areas, if you will, there were current use dollars, meaning dollars that they would need in the first 1 to 3 years. There were midterm dollars, so they were that they might spend in the next 4 to 6 years, and then there were long-term needs, which either could be endowment or reserves. So how this kind of played out as an example. So what we also knew that they needed to grow their annual fund to a minimum of 10 million a year, and that growth, we were a little concerned if the annual fund on its own could do this, so we rolled the piece of the growth of the annual fund into the campaign. So that's what some of the current use is. So if we look at our music, for instance, the artistic core might be some of the annual shortfall that they would spend in the next 1 to 3 years. Could also be for an expanded season of performances, but then they also needed midterm dollars, because until the endowment was fully funded and fully capitalized, they would need the dollars to make up for what that difference was. And then long term, that might be endowed shares. So I won't go through each of these, but that kind of gives you a sense of that. Our community might be redesigning, having some digital interactive activities, website, CD label launch kind of thing. The interim might be an innovation fund or an audience development fund, what they're trying to do to grow and build those audiences, and long term, how they would permanently endow. So if we move to the next slide, we'll talk about what we did with this. So we went through a board visioning session, and our communications team came out to Seattle and it had a really wonderful generative conversation at the board level. And what they began to talk about is, fundamentally putting the questions back to the board. Why does Seattle need an innovative orchestra? Why is it important for the community support? And what does it actually mean for the city of Seattle to have this orchestra here? Or how do we capture and build on the symphony's new momentum after this difficult period? The symphony has arrived at a new moment with new leadership, and how do we capture this positive terms that inspire pride and confidence? And much of what we saw when we did earlier studies is the community really is prideful. Seattle community, when we talked about, the reason the symphony might need a bigger endowment is because, their endowment is so much smaller than some of their peers around the country. Most of the donors didn't really care how they compared to other orchestras around the country. They cared about their own orchestra in Seattle. And we also talked about, are we preserving what we have through this campaign, or are we really pushing into new territory? So is this campaign ultimately focused on the survival of the orchestra or its reinvention? And can survival concept really resonate enough with donors? And then ultimately, what will the symphony look like after the campaign? This is about a future, and what does success actually look like, and how do we define that? So, and then there's also a lot of conversation always about, what's the right balance between traditional and innovative, and to what extent should we position the orchestra as innovative and risk-taking? So after this conversation happened, Jane's going to talk to you about how the staff began to develop the case.
Sure. So typically, after you have that visioning exercise, you put together a committee with board members and staff, and in our case with musicians, and you have a planning committee so you can develop the case together. But at the same time, we were working with an extremely large collaborative group within the organization, working on our 3-year strategic plan, and we really felt that to run 2 large groups at the same time, to get them to the same place, would be administratively a huge burden for us, would slow us down, and possibly would not work. So my boss and I, along with the CFO and artistic leadership, we sketched out our case, the financial goals and the theme areas that we talked about before, and we brought Campbell in to sort of put the meat on the bones, as it were. And we had a planning committee that reviewed this work, so it took us about 6 months to put it together. We had a planning committee that reviewed the work. We didn't do it in isolation. We did talk to board members along the way. And then we all convened. They recommended it to the executive committee and then to the board. And this was an extremely efficient way to do it. But was it the most effective way to do it? This is the second deviation that we did in this process. And you'll see when we talk about some challenges that we had along the way that board members didn't exactly, the inner circle onboarded all our goals, the outer circle not so much. So anyway, so we came up with a campaign theme, Forever and for Everyone. It's pretty self-explanatory. We want the orchestra we want this campaign, the monies we raise, to build our financial resiliency so that we can be here forever, and then we can increase access to everyone in the community. So it's artistic, it's investing in our hall, it's capitalization, it's opening doors to live music in the community, and shaping young minds. So education, preparing great young minds for tomorrow, and getting into our regional schools. Next slide, Craig.
Thanks, Jane. So the next section is internal preparedness, and we'll walk you through on the next slide what we began to do. So the first thing we did was we sent the entire database out to Target Analytics to have it screened, and they came back with 50,000 records that returned with predictive modeling scores, and they took the best 5,000 and returned them with hard asset data and wealth screening. So what we wanted to do is find out, who were their best prospects? Did they in fact were cultivating the right people? And so if you go to the next slide, what we did was we conducted what we called a capacity analysis. And so since the list was so large, what we wanted to do is narrow the list at first. So we broke them into 2 categories. One were prospects and one were future prospects. So prospects we felt were good, solid prospects that we could cultivate and solicit during this campaign. Future prospects were also really good prospects, but perhaps took a little bit more to bring them along and might be the second set that we should work with. So in all, we broke it apart into donors that had the capacity to write $100,000 and above check over a 5-year period. So of that, our prospect pool was 618 people that were identified that could write a check of $100,000 and above. And then there were an additional 1,200 future prospects that fit in that category. If you go to the next slide, what we did then was conduct a gap analysis. So we took all of the prospects that identified. So this is a typical campaign gift table. Down the left side, the levels of gifts they would need to secure in order to be successful in a campaign. Next column over is how many gifts they would need at each of those levels. Third column over is how many prospects. It's around a 3-to-1 ratio for every prospect you for every gift you get, you need about 3 prospects identified that not only could give at that level, but might ever consider the Symphony as an organization that they would invest in at that level. And then the next column shows how many we had identified at each of those levels, and then the far right column is the delta. So it looks pretty good on paper, considering the campaign ultimately is going to be a cash and planned gift goal, and we based this analysis on 100% cash. So we thought, okay, from the prospect standpoint, they have enough prospects likely to be successful. But what we found when we dug a little bit deeper is on the next slide. So again, of the prospects that were identified that were rated at $100,000 and above, only 40% of those prospects were actually sitting in a major gift officer portfolio. So obviously there's a lot more opportunity, but when we dug down even further, it was a little bit, when we drilled down a little bit more concerning as we got into the next slide. So of the prospects that were in portfolios, the $100,000 plus prospects, 62% of those that were being managed were actually rated less than 100,000. That's the little circle on the bottom of this chart. So of the 618 prospects, only 548 didn't have a manager. And so ultimately the recommendation was we needed to do some work in rebalancing the portfolios. So on the next page, we suggested that each major gift officer have a balanced portfolio. This kind of represents what our recommendation was, a 20% be in qualification, 40% in cultivation, 20% in solicitation, 20% in stewardship. But what we also suggested, there were many prospects that people had worked with for many years, or that were guaranteed that they would get that $10,000 or $25,000 gift every year. But some people maybe were transactional donors. They were getting that because they would get better seating, not because they were philanthropically inspired, and some of them likely may not give at higher levels. So what we suggested was that we unplug some of those from the major gift officers and put it into what we would calling a donor relations portfolio. So those who are unlikely to give at higher levels, or ones that were not yet assigned to a major gift staff, they got pulled out and managed. That was, more in an automated approach. And then we set up some metrics that were rigid metrics of how many upgrades we want to see you doing, how many personal solicitations, etc. And this was the metrics that we suggested. Also in the process of this, the Symphony came to us about doing a major gift audit, and James is going to tell you a little bit about that and what the implementations of those recommendations were like.
Sure. Can we go to the next slide? So one of the interesting things about taking a look at our data and figuring out that we didn't have there were people in the wrong portfolios. There were people who were hoarding prospects when they were, they were not appropriate, sort of low-level donors with senior staff who had comfortable relationships with them. We had to do a lot of tree shaking and be very, purposeful with people to say, look, you don't own these people. Their relationship primarily is with the organization, we need to be clear that if you're not having, meaningful interaction or moving people up the ladder, they need to move to one of these maintenance portfolios, or you have to ask them for more money. This is just sort of on the annual fund side, getting prepped for the campaign, or they move to somebody else and you're not the right person. It really required staff to focus on the institution and maintain good personal relationships, but really be very dispassionate about the goals of the organization and what the best way to manage people were. So, all the data in the world, doesn't help you, however, if you don't have the right people or the right skills in your development department. And 2 years in, so we really started with our major gifts in sort of summer of 2013, really launching the campaign in the, internally in the fall of 2013. In 2 years in, we really hit a wall, not financially, but organizationally. So Campbell recommended, and Craig particularly recommended, a major gift audit in early 2015. And while this was focused on major gifts, it actually covered our entire department. So, foundations, special events, corporate. And it came out with like three major findings, or we had three major issues. One was staffing. We had a historic understaffing. So when I started at the Symphony, we were supposed to raise, I don't know, $10 million a year, and we had 9 staff, including me. and fundraising at that time, this is a whole other seminar, was a plug number. It was not bottom-up budgeting. So we changed that, but we just did not have the right number of people to raise that money. We had systems problems. We had lack of logical, systematic, and consistent approach to fundraising using the current database. We were doing a lot of stuff still off spreadsheets. We had a lack of documentation of policies and procedures, so people were doing different things in different ways, and we had a lack of analysis of successful and failing programs and techniques. And we also did not, and this is before we launched the campaign, we also didn't integrate and promote fundraising effectively and coordinate it with the marketing of the concerts. Stunningly enough, we did not do that. And environmentally, we had like aging or decreasing subscriber base, as I mentioned before, without a robust planned giving program. And we had really a lack of depth on the board and underutilization of board members who were good at fundraising. Can I go to the next slide? So the major gift audit took about 4 months and was a very honest examination of how information flowed, where skill gaps existed, where responsibility gaps existed, and also staffing levels and the skills needed. It helped us to realign functions. It helped us to outsource some functions, for example, like research. For me personally, it helped me stop doing the wrong work. So, for example, our weekly and monthly financial reports, I personally did that. For the first 2.5 years, I pulled the raw data and I worked that data, and that was the wrong work for me to do. And that's just one glaring example of how I needed to realign my work. And as a result, the result was that we developed the standards that Craig talked about earlier: the number of visits, the number of steps and moves. We have ways to track them and ways to implement them. And we had about 72 recommendations and 108 actions from the report, and we prioritized them, and we actually implemented all of them. And there are two things that happened about that. We did this implementation in a very disciplined way, and one of the things that happened, there are two things that happened. We had about a third of our staff turnover in the 6 months after the report, and in the 9 months after we had the report and implemented the changes, the entire campaign staff, it was about 4 people, the entire campaign staff turned over. So that also addressed the sort of getting the right people in with the right skills.
Jane,
So
we had a question from the audience about how we were able to separate some of the donors from the major gift officer, but I think that the turnover.
How did we separate them?
Yeah, so I think the turnover partly talks about that, because there was actually no choice besides having many of them reassigned, but because the donors get very connected.
Yeah. So I mean, I think the way you do it is you're honest and upfront. You haven't touched this person in 6 months, and you don't have a relationship with them, so they're being reassigned to someone else, period. I mean, this is, you just have to be really straightforward about it, and be dispassionate, right? This is about the good of the organization. And I think I personally give people up all the time. Am I friends with Mrs. Smith? Absolutely. Do I have time to talk to Mrs. Smith because she's below the threshold of the level of donors I typically deal with? No. So you know what? I actually don't manage Mrs. Smith, period. That's it. I hope that addresses it. It's tough. It's tough love. It's tough portfolio love. That's all there is to it. So can we go to the next slide, please? I just want to make sure we get through the entire presentation. Okay, so donor engagement. One of the things that's really fantastic about working in the performing arts is that people they come and see you every single week. They're already voting. Number one, they're already voting with their wallets, and number two, we see them every week. We know where they sit. We know their preferences because of their purchasing decisions, and they truly love us. They love the orchestra. They love what they do. It's happy. It's life affirming. It makes them feel good. They want the music to last forever, and they want to share it. So in terms of donor engagement, we are already sitting on third base, feeling like we've hit a home run. It's a great place to be. But those numbers that came out of our analysis, how do we plow through upwards of 5,000 major gift prospects, or 1,000 with when we're not fully staffed? So we've been doing a number of things, not only seeing people in their seats and getting to know them, but we've been doing a couple of things that have been really helpful. So campaign related, we've been doing pre-concert briefing. So people are already coming to the concerts. We invite them to a briefing about an hour and a half before. And the purpose of this is to cultivate the expanded circle of major gift donors, provide focus group like setting to really inspire dialogue and gather perspectives on various elements of the case. We assess the inclination of these individuals to support the campaign. And you're invited to one of these things because you have gone through this analysis. Target Analytics did our data analysis, and we have literally 5,000 prospects that we are currently still plowing through, and we refresh our data every 3 years. And we also include volunteers, solicitors, musicians in this, and we really determine people's propensity to give at a major gift level. So there's a welcome. The host is typically our president and CEO because he does an excellent job at that. He describes the purpose of the meeting. He presents the campaign and really talks honestly about the 5 areas, including capitalization, which we're upfront about, in terms of that's ready cash, so we can do the ambitious stuff that we want to do. And then we have a group discussion. There's a major gift officer there and a musician. And we have feedback forms for the participants, and then that really helps us, introduce us to people who were not necessarily in portfolios who we're close to. We do 3 to 4 per year, and we get about 100 people a year through that, so that's really useful. The other thing that we also use are house parties and Jeffersonian dinners. So house parties are exactly what they sound like. They are recitals in people's homes. People love our musicians, and so when they are invited for free to somebody's home where they can accommodate 30 to 40 people, there's a performance, we have a little chat about the campaign, what we're doing, and then we have about 1 development person per 10 people attending, so that everyone purposely gets touched, and then we have a review afterwards about follow-up. And then the second thing that we do is we have Jeffersonian dinners. So, when you're doing your campaign assessment and you're looking farther and farther out from the people who are already buying your tickets to people who have major capacity could help you, you really want to do things that are much more intimate and are led by community leaders that are on your board. So, for example, Leslie Chihuly is the chair of our board. Her is the president of Chihuly Inc., which is the business arm of Dale Chihuly, the glass artist business, who is her husband. She is a very, very prominent person in the community, so she can draw other people who are not, quite inside the tent, but could help us. And in our community, we have. Bill Gates lives in our community, Paul Allen, Howard Schultz, Jeff Bezos, they all live here. So these Jeffersonian dinners are a much better thing for very high net worth individuals to get involved. You have 12 to 14 people. The parties are initiated. They come through with $50 to $250 to $1 million worth of donations. And we are doing these dinners where we have a conversation about what do you think the role arts or the symphony should play in your community, and really it's a good tool to use to get closer to people who are not quite inside the tent. So can we go to the next slide? So here's the thing, we just have tons and tons of opportunities. So where are we now? We're almost 4 years into the campaign, and we are just fully staffed. We have 19 people on staff, and we have 1.5 positions that we're waiting to fill. We'll probably do that in the next fiscal year. and those are both campaign positions. We have processes and procedures in place. Everybody follows them. We have a qualification pipeline established with metrics and deliverables for major gift officers, which we review every month. We have engaged volunteers organized around campaign themes, and we have lots of opportunity. Right staff, right processes, right metrics, and engaged volunteers. Craig?
So on the next slide, we're going to finally talk through the leadership. So if you can go to one more slide. So after, go to the next slide, if you could. Okay. So after, no, one back, thank you. Thank you. So after about 9 months of planning, we went to the board, presented a recommendation to move forward with the campaign. By time we got to the board, they had already secured 2 $10 million gifts. So it was an easy vote, I think, for the board to say, yes, we're ready to move forward with the campaign. They approved to move forward with a 5-year campaign. They approved that it would be a combination of cash and planned giving. And then ultimately, they suggested a working goal of 100 million that we would reevaluate as we got through into the campaign a little bit further before it finally goes public. We believe that 100 million is still too low, that they need to go farther, and they've made some huge strides, which Jane's going to start going through with you in the rest of the slides here.
Sorry, I'll just unmute myself there just a second. So things are ticking along nicely. You know, September 13 to September 15. In the first 3 months of the campaign, we raised $8 million. In the second year, we raised $24 million. In the third year, we raised $21 million, and the rate's been about $2 million a month. And then in the first quarter of FY16, we only raised $2 million over those 3 months. And we do some analytics, and if you take a look at the bottom right-hand corner of this dashboard, you'll see that only 30% of the board has given a gift, and almost half of them have not been solicited. So can we go to the next slide? So we in January 2016, we have a board retreat. So this is sort of the next time we crash the plane. And we realize we have a leadership problem. We go to this board retreat and present this this stat, and a large number of the board members are there, majority of the board members are there, and because they had not been involved in the planning of the campaign, some of them really did not think the campaign, they had no idea that they were really supposed to support it. So that was news to them, and that we realized we had a communication problem. So one of the ways that we deal with challenges here at the Symphony is that we like task forces, and we set these up to deal with short-term issues. They meet 1 or 2 times, solve the problem with board members, and then carry on. So we put together with the support, actually the board suggested this, a board campaign task force, and it started meeting monthly between March 2016 through February 17, and there were 2 goals. One was to solicit and close all of the board campaign gifts, and the other was to raise $10 million in cash, because we had two dual goals, and so by the time we closed down the board campaign task force, we had raised our board participation from, I think it was like 30% to almost 80%, and the reason why that is because we have new board members coming on all the time, so it takes them a little while to get situated before we ask them for their campaign gift, although they do know about it before they come on board. And we did not raise the $10 million in cash, but we're getting there. So one of the things that we were able to do was we were able to use the data that we were now proactively using to put together solicitor dashboards, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time going through these. You can take a look at them afterwards, but basically we were able to show everybody in the board campaign task force, BCTF, who was in cultivation, who was in solicitation, who was in stewardship and declined, and then the individual solicitors dashboard about how they stood. Can I go to the next slide, please? They also got details, step reports. We use Tessitura, so we have lots of data. We can pull out data about, sort of the name of the prospect, the next step, when it's due, who is doing the step, and who the MGO is working on it. And the next slide, please. And then also a summary of their portfolio, what status they are, what their high and low evaluation is, and then what their priority is. So this information, and I'm happy to share what the actual ones look like, because we've broken this up so you can see them on a slide. We produce these every month, so people, solicitors, the board members really had their feet held to the fire. They said, we want to help. So we said, okay, that's great. We're going to use the data to show how you can help us, and you're all going to sign up for these people to solicit. And the flip side of that is that we can also use the same tools to show the gift officers how they're doing on their portfolio, which is also something elegant and worthwhile. Can we see the next slide, please? So where we were in the previous slides, we are now at we're actually now at like 75.5 million. This slide is a week old, so we also changed how we were monitoring things. We were just monitoring everything coming in, and we were not emphasizing to board members and to ourselves that we have a cash goal and we have a planned goal, and it's 50-50. We are almost at the planned goal, so we are now putting the emphasis on the right syllable, and we are only asking for cash and cash gifts. People tell us about planned gifts, that's fine, but we are mostly concentrating for like the next 2 years on cash gifts. And you can see now, showing the data this way, that we've seriously been behind in the cash portion of the campaign. So this has really helped us, hold our feet to the fire. So we're measuring ourselves against budget, and those graduated bands show each year what the budget is on either side. The board is almost complete, and we are still in the silent phase. So if you take a look at this data in another way, next slide. So our board participation is now actually, I think we're up to 80%, so that's changed slightly. Our cash and cash pledges are in much better shape. Our planned gifts have gone up, and we are now, and we've raised another $20 million. So our campaign is less siloed. All of our MGOs are involved in campaign identification. Our cabinet is re-engaged. We really deepen board engagement through the task force and involving board members as partners in campaign cultivation. And we have new staff in place. We have a new assistant vice president of the campaign. We have new gift officers and administration. We've outsourced our research function, and we really are pulling the rope as a department, all in the same direction. We have an events and stewardship manager. That's a new position. We do 80 events related to the annual fund and to the campaign, and we felt that it was just being done inconsistently across the department. So we have one person handling all those things, and now we're revisiting. What does it look like when do we want to go public? Do we want to go public at 80 million? Do we want to go public on an anniversary with the hall? And our goal really is to stay in silent campaign as long as we can, and then find an appropriate time to go public. And we'll need about a year to plan that, and one more staff person. And so we're sort of in a holding pattern on that. In the meantime, still raising 6- and 7-figure gifts for the campaign. So lessons learned. Well, you can fly the plane while you're building it. You should really invest in staff and processes up front. We did not do that. Engage volunteer leadership at the beginning and spread out from there, smaller and spread out. Understand your cash needs. We didn't really understand our cash needs, and we really needed to do that at the beginning. Don't be afraid to course correct. We've had at least 3 crashes in this campaign, and acknowledge them, be honest, be fearless, and then listen to your counsel. And Craig, you can hop in here. This is why you hired them. You know, if they keep saying things to you about, you know, you should be doing X or doing Y, it's not because they want to hear themselves talk. That's why you've got them. And I really am very appreciative, Craig, and everybody at Campbell for the support that they have given us, because we would not be at 75 million without their support.
So Rebecca, I think we have a couple of minutes left if there were any questions from the audience.
Yeah, I can help with that, Craig. So we have a question from the audience regarding, in hindsight, what would you have done differently, and what are you glad you did and wouldn't change?
Well, for me, in hindsight, I think what we would have done differently is gotten on top of our metrics and our data a lot sooner than we did, because that informed our processes and our procedures. The challenge is that we were not staffed properly. We didn't have enough people to put those processes in place. And so, you know, I think, you know, if I was going to do this at another organization, I would go in and say, okay, you've got X staff, let's say you've got 10 staff and you need eventually to have 20. I would do strategic hiring of the process and operations people first, and then hire the gift officers. We did that actually in the wrong order. We hired the gift officers first, and then the administrative people, and I think that's how I would change that.
Excellent, thank you. Another question from the audience. Would love to hear more about the Jeffersonian dinners. Who were the invites and the purpose around that?
Sure. So the Jeffersonian dinners are very targeted. They are the invites are high net worth individuals who have not made a gift to the campaign and are you know, positive towards the symphony or know about the symphony but are not subscribers. So basically, you know, people that we wanted to ask for, you know, sort of 6 to 7 figure gifts are capable of doing it and really would do it as part of the civic case for the symphony, as opposed to we love the music and we want to support it. We have other ways to get to those people. So these are high-end intimate dinners that are intellectually stimulating. And there's a lot of, there's certainly an element of healthy competition. You want people there who want to also see and be seen, being supportive.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. We have a number of questions. So everyone on the line, we're going to try to get through as many as possible within the time frame that we have. If we don't get to your question, we'll make sure to get to it afterwards. So bear with us. Seattle Symphony has a deep pool of donors. What do you recommend for organizations in terms of order of operations for running a campaign that have a deficit in donor prospects in the database?
I have worked in several organizations, including this one, where there have been claims that we have a deficit of we don't have enough donors, and my answer to that is you need to roll up your sleeves and go and talk to people, because I have found that if you get your data analyzed and you slice it different ways, you will find that you actually have lots of prospects, but you're looking in the wrong place. So for example, when I was at the Canadian Opera Company, you know, we could not get, the main motivation for donating at a certain level was to have good seating. And everybody had good seating for a number of years, and so they didn't really feel motivated to donate, and we were doing the wrong analysis. So what we did was we had well screening done in our database, and instead of talking to people about a transactional thing, you know, you want to move your seating, we actually talked to them about their passion. We knew how much money they had. We knew that they could give a 5-figure gift, and we talked about their passion and how they might want to support the organization in line with what we knew their capacity was, and we doubled the annual fund while we were building a building.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think Jane brings up a very good point. You know, so often we see the actual issue is that people just aren't getting out there and talking to their donors. I mean, when we first started working with Seattle Symphony, I'd always make the comment when I come up and visit that, you know, I see a lot of major gift officers all sitting at their desk, which I would expect that they would be out in the community. And what we find is when we're talking with donors from many, many organizations, that the organization seems to know a whole lot about the donor, but the donor doesn't seem to know a whole lot about the organization. And I think it reminds me of what Walter Annenberg once said: it's not about who you know, it's about who knows you back. And it usually is because the organization is not getting out enough to talk to the donors to really learn what motivates them and how they might connect better to the organization.
Excellent. We'll just do a couple more here. How did you decide what to do in-house versus outside?
I think in-house and outside really depends on the services that you that are available, and research is really is frankly an easy one. Data analysis, obviously, it's hard to have that that skill in-house, and it's just a lot more efficient. I mean, when you take a look at how much you have to pay a full-time researcher versus the 20 or 30 in-depth profiles you need a year, it's a no-brainer. It's just much more economically efficient, and I'm also and I think Craig shares this view with me, is that I like my gift officers to do a lot of their own research and only send things out to research for in-depth stuff. I think otherwise people rely on the researcher to feed them stuff that they should be doing instead of getting out there and doing it. Now, I have a former colleague who I think is on the phone in LA, and another organization he used to work for. They had a very different model where they had outsourced research, but their outsourced research was fantastic and fed them a lot of prospects. So, but you just really need to take a look at the skills that you have. And so, for example, what else do we outsource? We outsource report writing, things that we don't have the skills to do for our database. It's just a lot more efficient.
We are everyone's time. We will try our best to get back to all of the questions that we have yet to get through. And but Jane and Craig, thank you so much for your time today. It was really wonderful to everything that you covered. And thank you for everyone who joined us today. If you have any follow-up questions, you can contact Jane and Craig directly, as you see on your screen. Our next webinar is scheduled for Tuesday, June 13th, where we'll be reporting the Giving USA results live, and you can make sure to register at our website. And from all of us at Campbell Company, we hope you have a great day. Thanks so much.